You're listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Praska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, we're exploring frontotemporal degeneration, or FTD, a lesser-known form of dementia. FTD can affect adults as young as in their 40s or 50s, often bringing significant changes in behavior, language, and personality. It's a journey that touches not only those diagnosed, but their families and care partners as well. Joining me for this important conversation are Esther Kane, the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration, or AFTD's Support and Education Director, and Liz Zadnik, an AFTD Ambassador for Pennsylvania. Esther is a compassionate registered nurse with a deep commitment to promoting health and wellness. Her clinical background spans dementia care, neurology, orthopedics, and stroke rehabilitation. Liz became an AFTD ambassador to serve others, a core value she learned from her mother, who was diagnosed with FTD. During our conversation, Esther will help us understand what FTD is, how it differs from other dementias, who it affects, and how families can access support. Liz will share her personal experience with FTD and the impact of her work as an ambassador. Let's begin by meeting our guests. Esther and Liz, welcome, and thank you both for being here. How are you today?
Well, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you, Esther?
I'm good. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. To start, can you each share a bit about yourselves and your connection to the FTD community? Esther, would you like to go first?
Sure. So my name is Esther Kane, and I am AFTD's Director of Support and Education. I have been with AFTD for almost 5 years, and my role at AFTD is really to ensure that those who are diagnosed with FTD receive good support, information, and that we have programs and services to support them along the way, as well as educating healthcare professionals more about FTD.
Nice to meet you. And Liz, how about you?
Hi, I'm Liz. I am in the Philadelphia area. I'm a former care partner for my mom who was diagnosed with FTD, and I have been a volunteer with the AFTD for a little over 2 years and an ambassador since January. So excited to be here and to contribute to the organization's really meaningful mission.
And I'm so excited to have you and be able to get both perspectives about FTD and the AFTD community. So first to start, I'm going to welcome just Liz to the stage and begin with her personal story. So Liz, can you share your family's experience with FTD with us?
Sure thing. I'm still working through our story of how to tell it in a way that feels like authentic and grounded, but I've found that moving chronologically typically works best. So I'll start by saying that my mom was a mental health professional for a majority of my life and a strong vocal advocate for reducing stigma around mental health. She served her community and our family throughout her entire life, and she worked full-time, operated a couple of consulting businesses, taught various healing practices, and volunteered to support essential needs in our neighborhood. I like to start by sharing a little bit about her first before we get into the FTD journey, which is a small but meaningful or significant chapter of her life. So my mom and I spoke pretty much every day, even before I could make intelligible words. She never hesitated to answer my calls or texts or, pop-ins to her house. But around 2017 or 2018, things started to shift. She stopped consistently answering the door or the phone. And I felt this really like kind of marked distance between us, which was the first time in my life I had ever felt that. And at first I attributed this to her work. The work that she did was intense. It gave her a lot of purpose, but it could be heavy. And she also served as my grandfather or her father's primary care partner, and he passed in 2018. These things didn't necessarily feel quite right to me, but nothing else clicked as the source of the changes, which kind of when we talk a little bit more about the importance of FTD awareness and AFTD, I wish that I had found AFTD a little bit sooner or learned more about FTD earlier in our journey. But fast forward a little bit to the height of the COVID pandemic. My mom worked in a hospital, so we could not really be in close proximity. But she was missing work, which I came to find out, which was incredibly unlike her and her really strong work ethic, and behaving in increasingly confusing and uncharacteristic ways. I'll say when I introduced her, I'll reiterate that she was an incredibly empathetic and private person. And these core qualities of hers were changing pretty dramatically. And after a systems intervention, so a formal system kind of got involved, my younger sister and I became our mom's power of attorney, and were able to kind of take the lead in taking care of her and finding a diagnosis or some source of these symptoms or things that she was expressing. And at this point, she was only 61, so 61 years old. So I'll pause. I know Esther's going to talk about this a little bit later, but for folks not familiar with FTD or frontotemporal degeneration, it's a cluster of different subtypes of the brain changing physically. So it can include movement changes, language changes, or behavior shifts. So my mom's FTD subtype sits into that third bucket where her behavior was changing and was getting pretty unpredictable. And this subtype is often misdiagnosed as a mental health condition. So because of her training as a psychotherapist and pretty vocal advocate around mental health, my sister and I felt really knowledgeable about this. And those diagnoses or misdiagnoses didn't really sit right. And when we pushed back on some of the healthcare professionals or the assisted living and memory care community professionals that we were working with, they were not necessarily open to those discussions by and large. So I, was really frustrated, if I'm being honest, and it's no disrespect to anyone in this situation, but I felt like we weren't being listened to, and my mom wasn't being listened to. So that really ignited in me this commitment to continue her work around, addressing mental health stigma and protecting other people, right, and other people's loved ones that may be experiencing mental health challenges. So a huge part of this chapter was research. So I was my mom's primary care partner, and I was always looking for ways to access services and to connect with innovative care options and help her feel empowered. That was probably my biggest drive, is to make sure that, she was safe, and also that she felt like she was still herself going through this process. And that's how I found AFTD, right? Trusty Google helped me with some of the things that I was researching. And when I found AFTD and learned about FTD, it was like, hearing our story back to us and feeling so less alone. It can be a really lonely journey. I think that's pretty typical of rare condition, experiences for folks living with rare conditions. And their families and care partners. But I found the behavioral or the diagnostic checklists, fact sheets, and recorded webinars, and I just couldn't get enough of all of that information. It felt like truly a lifeline for me and for her and for our family. So I was able to learn more about, I was hoping to learn about treatments, but unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. And disease progression. So we were able to get my mom connected with a specialist in the area, and they shared a probable diagnosis of FTD. And then we were finally connected after years to more appropriate supports and to a community, right? We got to be part of this really loving, compassionate, open and honest FTD community. And I was then able to better educate the memory care specialists as her disease progressed and she moved into a memory care community. And things progressed pretty rapidly over the course of a year. And I was also able to chat with her extended care team about patterns I was noticing. We were better communicating with one another once we knew maybe what was coming down the line. And I do have to shout out, if it's all right, the Penn FTD Center. Their team was such an incredible resource for us. They were super responsive to questions and helped me navigate the different systems that popped up to help secure care for her. I was also able to share AFTD and Penn FTD Center's resources with my family and our family. So my mom is 105, and my grandmother is fortunately still with us. So we were able to make sense of things kind of retrospectively or retroactively. And I think it brought us all closer together as we became more focused on keeping my mom safe, supported, and cognitively engaged as much as we possibly could. And I know this isn't the case for all families navigating, dementia or rare illnesses or rare conditions. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. And when my mom passed in August of 2023, I think each of us had a lot of feelings about how FTD changed her and temporarily changed our relationships to each other and with her. It's a brutal condition that impacts what we consider to be deeply human qualities and abilities, right? The parts of our brain, and I know Esther's going to talk about this, the parts of our brain that are affected are, I think, what we sometimes can take for granted as people and as human beings. And watching someone so full of compassion and composure and drive lose those is really devastating. And that's what motivated me to become a vocal advocate for AFTD, for care partners and folks affected by FTD, living with FTD, and to volunteer so that I could help other families and other folks find that clarity and that connection that I was looking for throughout my journey. So,
Liz, thank you so much for so openly and candidly sharing your story and your family's story and your mom's story. I'm very sorry to hear about her passing, and I can tell really what a lovely woman she had to have been from the stories that you shared. And I just want to extend my gratitude for you being here today and really opening up with that deeply personal story. I know in my experience with, sharing personal stories through the podcast, it makes such an impact on others. And as you were saying, I completely agree. It helps people feel less alone and like they can reach out and perhaps be more of an advocate for themselves and their family. So sharing your story absolutely makes an impact.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I love talking about her. I love sharing her values with other people because I know that they resonate, the sense of community that she always wanted to cultivate. So thank you for creating space for me to share.
Oh, you're welcome. So moving on to the next part of our episode, I'm going to welcome Esther back to the stage. to talk more about FTD and get some of the specifics about it so we can all learn together. And then to conclude the episode, we're going to have Esther and Liz back to talk more about the organization AFTD, as well as Liz's experience with sharing her role as being an advocate for the organization. Esther, welcome back to the stage. And before we dive into FTD, I want to give you the opportunity to reflect on anything that Liz shared with us.
First, I just want to thank Liz for being so honest and sharing her story, and her mom, sharing more about her mom and who she was, because I agree with you, Cheryl. Her mom is an inspiring woman. And seeing how FTD impacted her family, I really wish that Liz's story was unique, and then I never heard that before. But unfortunately, what Liz and her family experienced in getting a diagnosis, as well as finding a community who understand the disease, is unfortunately too often replicated in so many families. So really, thank you for having us here today, Cheryl, to talk about this and just to raise more awareness.
And thank you for helping me do the same with my audience of listeners and the Friends Life Care community. Esther, I'd love it if you'd be able to share with us what brought you to this field of work.
Yeah, so I am a registered nurse, and I actually stumbled into dementia care. I did not have dementia in my family, one of the few who did not. And as a young graduate, I ended up working in a memory care community. And I fell in love with working with people with dementia. There was just something about the fact that we were able to bring joy, that we were able to bring connection to so many people that were lacking it, that really just captured me. And I ended up working in long-term care for quite a while, doing admissions, marketing, and that type of thing, and facility care. And eventually, I ended up feeling like I want to go to nursing school. I really want to improve the quality of life of these families. And so I went back to nursing school, and I ended up working as a director of nursing for quite a while, really helping to see what can we do to improve the quality of life of people impacted by dementia as a whole. When this position came available at AFTD, it really was the accumulation of a lot of my skills and areas of interest. And I've always been really passionate about seeing what can we do to make the lived experience of dementia better? How can we create more connection? What resources and things can we put into place to improve people's quality of life? And so AFTD has been a wonderful opportunity for me to continue that personally and professionally, to see what can we do to ensure that when somebody's diagnosed with FTD, they are embraced by a community, that they are embraced by supports and resources and information to be able to navigate the disease, as well as really seeing what can we do to educate health professionals so that they understand. Liz was talking a little bit about some of the health professionals not really hearing them or listening. It's not as if families expect the health professionals to know everything about the disease, but they want to be heard and be listened to as they talk about some of these different symptoms or some of the ways that FTD is different than other forms of dementia.
And Liz did a nice job sharing with us about what is FTD, frontotemporal degeneration. It's something I'm learning about too. And I'd also like to hear from you, because I'm going to assume some of my listeners are not familiar with this disease. And can you explain how it's different from other forms of dementia?
Yeah. So FTD is a form of dementia. Dementia is a large umbrella term that we use to describe changes in cognition, changes in language, changes in movement, personality. And FTD is one of the dementias that falls under that. Other examples are Alzheimer's disease, which is a form of dementia. We have Lewy body dementia, which is a form of dementia, vascular dementia, which is a form of dementia. So frontotemporal degeneration falls in the dementia big umbrella, but as a disease, it's very different. So FTD typically affects people at a younger age, with known people being diagnosed as young as 21 years old. Typically, individuals are diagnosed between the ages of 45 and 65, but we have families that we talk to up to 80 and as young as 21. FTD also affects different domains of the brain. So because FTD affects the temporal and frontal lobes of the brain, we see different changes than you might see in Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body disease. So we're going to see more personality changes, as Liz talked about, behaviors that might be different. We're going to see a lot of language changes that can occur in terms of communication or the ability to form speech, as well as movement changes. And when these changes occur, they often look very different than some of the changes we might see in Alzheimer's disease or in Lewy bodies disease. So very often memory can stay intact for a long time with FTD. And we'll hear a lot from families that the professionals are saying they don't really have dementia because their memory is intact. But that's not really true. They're having executive dysfunction. They're having other issues that are occurring in their brain that is causing them to have the behaviors or symptoms that they're presenting with.
So you talked about FTD typically affecting individuals who are younger. And I'm curious, anything to add about who would typically be affected by FTD? And are there some early warning signs that we could be looking for?
So because FTD actually, I think we have to start a little bit more in the clinical subtypes. So FTD is a really diverse diagnosis. So some people can start to present with language changes, and we typically call those primary progressive aphasias, and there's 3 different subtypes of primary progressive aphasia. And when people start with some of these different subtypes, their prognosis can be very different, and what we're seeing in the patient can look very different. So what we typically see on how the disease progresses can look different from person to person. And the behavioral variant of FTD, which is another one of the subtypes, which is what Liz was talking about, we typically see symptoms being more of loss of empathy, apathy, executive dysfunction, hyperorality, compulsive behaviors. Those are some of the examples of behaviors we'll see in behavioral variant FTD. Whereas in the movement disorders of corticobasal degeneration or progressive supranuclear palsy, it starts to look like, and we call them atypical Parkinsonisms because they tend to start to look like a Parkinson's type of disease, but it's not a Parkinson's disease. That's not the underlying pathology that's going on that's causing the symptoms. And so the early warning signs can differ depending on the person. But typically what we're seeing is a new acute change in either language, personality, or behavior who was not there prior. So somebody who's always had maybe a psychiatric condition or always had narcissistic type of behavior, that would not be somebody who we would think would have a new onset symptom. But it's that person who typically maybe was easygoing or kind, very gentle, and all of a sudden they're saying really inappropriate, ungentle things. And the family is looking around going, that is so odd. This is odd. It doesn't make sense. Something's not matching up. This behavior is not matching up. Or it's the loss of language that starts to occur where all of a sudden they're missing words or they're stuttering over words. You know, we've heard that people initially think they have a new onset stutter that's occurring, and that's why we're seeing some of these behaviors. So the symptoms can be very nuanced, but what you're really looking for is the new onsetness of these symptoms, as well as the progression of these symptoms. FTD is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. And so the typical life expectancy is between 7 to 13 years. So we're going to see continued changes, and usually we're going to see symptoms coming in from other domain areas. So even though you might start with behavioral issues, there might start to be language changes or movement changes that can occur. And really the cascade of the diagnosis depends on how the disease kind of moves through the brain. So as it moves through the brain, we're going to see different domains and areas of the brain affected, and that can differ from person to person. So it may not always be the same exact trajectory that we see.
And so much of Liz's story is coming up for me with what you were saying, and especially the word empathy, where Liz was talking about how her mom was this very caring, empathetic person. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden that started to dissipate. And what I've, working in aging services, what I've also heard are individuals making up reasons why they think that their loved one is being a little more forgetful or acting a little bit differently. And it's so easy because, of course, we don't want our loved one to be going through any form of dementia or any type of illness. So just want to put out there that it sounds like when you start perhaps seeing some of these changes, it's absolutely a time to look into it further, because like the worst thing that could happen is they're like, oh, it's really nothing to worry about. It's okay. to look further and dig further when you think there's a problem with your loved one's memory.
Well, and I think similar to what Liz even said of it just didn't sit right, right? She was hearing, and as she was learning more about what they were saying or what they were saying her mom's diagnosis might have been, it wasn't matching. It wasn't sitting right. And we hear this over and over and over again, that when people finally get to a diagnosis of FTD, all of a sudden there's this sense of relief because diagnosis after diagnosis that was made just wasn't matching. The matches weren't happening. We're really lucky, as Liz said, in the Delaware Valley to have Penn FTD Center here. Penn FTD Center is a wonderful center. And I know that your podcast is really focused on this area. So if you're suspecting FTD or if you think the symptoms might be there, definitely go to Penn FTD Center, reach out to them and get an evaluation. They are a wonderful team that is really compassionate and they do a great job really helping you determine what's happening and what's going. I think sometimes people feel like they feel bad for digging in deeper. They feel like they should just trust the doctor who told them the diagnosis. FTD is often misdiagnosed as depression or Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, and they feel like they should just accept the diagnosis. But very often it requires some advocacy on the part of the family to be able to say, but no, this isn't right. This isn't right. And when they do find AFTD, they find a community of people who all of a sudden understand and they just get locked in because it's like I said, a breath of fresh air for these families.
So I understand that it is a not so common disease. However, can you explain to us how common or uncommon FTD is?
Yeah, so FTD is definitely less common than Alzheimer's disease. When we look at the different types of dementia, FTD makes up about 10 to 15% of all cases of dementia. In the US right now, they say there's between 50 and 60,000 people diagnosed with FTD, but we know that that's a gross underdiagnosis for a couple of reasons. One, there's not a lot of specialists out there who are experts in FTD, so getting an accurate diagnosis is very difficult. Two, we don't have clear biomarkers, so the only way to get a definitive diagnosis is really upon autopsy right now. Otherwise, a diagnosis made is typically what we call a probable FTD diagnosis, which is really based on the clinical symptoms. And lastly, we know that there are a lot of people who are just given a dementia diagnosis and the deeper digging is not happening. Now, I will say we're seeing a huge shift in this. Now that there are drugs coming out in the Alzheimer's space, more and more we need to know, is it Alzheimer's disease or not? Because if it's not, these drugs aren't going to help them, right? They haven't been tested in the other forms of dementia. And they're not really, the other forms of dementia don't have the same problems with plaques and tangles like we see in Alzheimer's disease. So these new treatments aren't, the core issue isn't the same. So they're not going to be effective crossover. So we really need to better understand what it is that people are dealing with. And so we are digging in deeper. Clinicians are starting to dig in deeper. And AFTD does a lot of work educating healthcare professionals, clinicians, neurologists, physicians, psychiatrists, the whole spectrum, and trying to ensure that people know that FTD is a diagnosis and that they dig in a little bit deeper.
Do we know what causes FTD? And are there any risk indicators or genetic factors that we know about?
So FTD, about 60% of the time, we don't know what's causing it. We don't know what's happening. There are three main proteins that accumulate in the brain in FTD. We call them TDP-43, tau, and FUS. And we don't know why these proteins are occurring in about 60% of cases. In 40% of cases, there is a familial history. And so there is multiple family members with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS, other diseases that make us wonder if it might be genetic. In 20% of cases, there's a known genetic risk. So we know that this disease is spread throughout the family and it is inherited from generation to generation. And so a lot of the work we do at AFTD is in supporting these genetic families. We have support groups for these genetic families. We have resources available for them. And there are consortiums and groups who are actively working right now to be able to find treatments and to advance the research so we can get to a disease-modifying treatment in FTD.
So if someone, let's say, suspects that they themselves or a loved one may be experiencing some of these symptoms that we've talked about that would be indicative of FTD, what are some steps that you could recommend that they take?
Go to the AFTD website, pull up the diagnostic checklist, and look and see, are these symptoms resonating with you? Do they make sense to you? If they do make sense to you and things are resonating with you, talk to your doctor. Ask for a referral. Like I said, in the Pennsylvania area here, we have Penn FTD Center. There's also a good group out of Geisinger doing good work. There's a group out of Hershey doing FTD diagnosis. There's Johns Hopkins in the Maryland area and quite a few centers in New York. So we're lucky in that there are a lot of FTD specialty centers not too far from us here in this particular area. So, make an appointment, get a referral, and get more information to better understand what you're dealing with.
One thing that's coming through loud and clear to me is that, of course, FTD is going to impact the individual who's going through it. Additionally, it impacts entire families. So what do you see as some of the most significant challenges that families face when a loved one is diagnosed?
I think the number one is stigma. So FTD is very isolating, right? When you have a disease that affects behavior and personality, it creates a lot of stigma. It creates a lot of uncomfortableness within the community. So when somebody's just walking up to people and telling them that they're fat or inappropriately touching or talking really close, that makes families really anxious, right? They're trying to protect their mom. They know she has a diagnosis or their dad, and this is why this is happening, but they keep doing these things. Neighbors are getting really upset because they keep acting inappropriately. They keep taking the trash out without a shirt on, or they're walking out in the snow with no shoes on, or things are happening because they have this disease. I think the way that society responds to this disease is actually one of the most isolating and difficult parts for the families. And the more that we can do to continue to break down that stigma and that really, I think judgment on the basis of people of just assuming the worst of others and not taking the time to dig in, the more support these families have automatically. AFTD does have some resources, and I can talk a little bit more about it later, but we have awareness cards. We have letters for community members and physicians. We encourage people to talk to their local police because the number one thing they can do to help themselves is to reduce the stigma and to raise awareness of FTD in their community. Because by doing so, the community tends to be more supportive of the person.
And I feel like there's so many other diagnoses that as a society, I feel that we're starting to get more familiar with and more accepting of. One that comes up for me would be individuals who are neurodivergent. So learning more about that. And so, again, I just want to encourage the listeners to be more open and be more curious about what might be going on with someone you see out in the community or in your neighborhood, and go into it with curiosity instead of criticism, because that can make all the difference. And perhaps for someone in your community, make it less lonely and less isolated, as we were just talking about.
Yeah.
So before we welcome Liz back, I want to go back to something you mentioned before, and it was talking about that there are some medications that are being approved or trialed for an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Are there any approved treatments or medications currently available for FTD?
Not currently approved, but we do have active clinical trials happening right now. So currently there are clinical trials, there's 6 active clinical trials as of today in the FTD space that are looking at disease modifying treatments. And if you really want to learn more about what's happening in this space and to engage with the research, I really recommend that you go to the AFTD website as well as the FTD Disorders Registry. The FTD Disorders Registry is a database, a research database that works to help connect the community with the research and the research with the researchers to better improve the quality of life and the lived experience of FTD. And so if you want to learn more about what's happening in the FTD research space, you want to go to the FTD Disorders Registry.
And just so listeners know, I will link both of those websites as resources in today's show notes. So now we're going to bring back Liz to join us to talk more about AFTD and who you are as an organization, and also Liz's experience being an ambassador for AFTD. Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. Welcome back to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, where today I'm joined by Esther Kane and Liz Zadnik for an important conversation about frontotemporal degeneration. Liz, welcome back again to the stage. We're going to get into learning more about, as I said, AFT as an organization and your work as an ambassador. So can we get started by hearing more about AFTD's mission and how the organization supports individuals and families navigating this diagnosis?
So AFTD is a nonprofit patient advocacy organization whose mission is to improve the quality of life of those impacted by FTD and to drive research to a cure. So everything we do every day is really about raising our voices, advancing advocacy to improve the quality of life of those impacted, advancing the research to improve the quality of life of those impacted, as well as looking to develop supports and systems to support those along the journey. Now, AFTD was started over 20 years ago by a woman named Helen Ann Comstock. And Helen Ann's husband was diagnosed with FTD, and she recognized the fact that in order for families to really find a community, to find people who understood FTD as a diagnosis, that there had to be an organization specifically dedicated to FTD. And so with $1,000 donation, she started AFTD with some volunteers, and we have now grown to a much bigger organization with a much bigger footprint. But it was really the mission and the drive of one woman that really made it so that we are where we are today. I don't know if I'm sure she foresaw a future with clinical trials and with our helpline talking to so many families and so many support groups. But I'm sure also that it's shocking and exciting to see where we are today.
It's amazing to hear what a nominal amount of money to start an organization and yet a huge ambition can really do over time. So that's an amazing story to hear. Thanks for sharing it. Liz, is there anything you want to jump in with about how AFTD's mission and the organization supported your family?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly can't say enough because I think the organization continues to support us and to support me. But I will say that I wasn't thrilled to discover or to learn about FTD, but I was so relieved to find an organization and a community of people who knew what we were going through. And I wish I had known them earlier in our journey. I think the staff and the volunteers are so bold in their support and in their vision. You had mentioned like this, a vision and some resources can truly change the world. And I think that AFTD is a perfect example of that. I'll also say that like Esther's introduction of herself around, loving, working in dementia care and assisted living communities is indicative of everyone I've met on the team at AFTD, is that they're so intentional about how they center the lived experience of folks either diagnosed or living with FTD, care partners, communities, in everything that they do and in every mission area. And I will say that something that I'm very excited about and grateful for that they're doing is that healthcare professional education that Esther mentioned, is that I know that doctors, nurses, clinical staff want to help people, and that it's great to have an organization that's trying to give them the tools to do that, right? I know that misdiagnoses and sometimes referred to as like the diagnose and adios kind of story is unfortunately uncommon, but or pretty common, but I know that healthcare professionals want to help people, and I'm glad that AFTD is seeing that a core mission area to help folks find it sooner, identify it sooner, and connect people with services.
So for people who are newly diagnosed, it sounds like it can be scary. It can be uncertain. And it can also be pretty frustrating because you might have gone through a bunch of misdiagnoses to eventually land on what is actually going on with either myself or my loved one. And with that goes the need to have a strong support team. And that could be, with your loved ones as well as with medical professionals, of course. So I'd be curious to hear how you'd both recommend someone who has recently had this diagnosis go about building their support team. Do you want to start, Esther? And then we'll hear from you, Liz.
So I think there's steps in the process, right? I think for most people right after a diagnosis, there's just a lot of shock. There's just shock, there's grief, and it's a lot to take in. So AFTD does have resources for people after a diagnosis. We have a publication that's specifically designed for people right after a diagnosis that kind of walks through all the things they should think about or might want to plan for. In addition to that, I think the number one thing that people can do is first learn about the disease. So go to the website. Go all over the website. Read it as you can tolerate it, as you can handle it. Maybe it's snippets per day. Maybe it's a little bit here, a little bit there. But start to dive in and familiarize yourself with the website and the information and the resources that are available on your website. Once you've learned more about the disease, you really want to kind of look at building your care team. And I'm really encouraging people more and more to, as soon as they can, to start that legal and financial planning. I think sometimes people wait too long to start that process. But when you start early with legal and financial planning, one, the person diagnosed can play a little bit of a role in really helping to express what they want in terms of quality of life and advanced care planning. Sometimes you can learn codes to things or find things that you may not know exist, that the person might have had some secret piles of money or things going on. You can get powers of attorneys and guardianship things done and get all those things organized out early. So we really encourage you start those discussions really as soon as you can after a diagnosis. And then after that, you want to build your care team. So join a support group. AFTD has 100 support groups or almost 100 support groups throughout the country. There's tons of different kinds of support groups. There's support groups for young adult caregivers, for spouses, for people with behavioral variant or language variant or FTD ALS. There's a large number of opportunities available, but find your community through support groups. There's also closed Facebook groups that are available to talk to other families impacted by FTD. You can volunteer, you can go to meet and greets. There are a lot of opportunities out there for you to be able to connect with other people who understand your diagnosis. But you also want to create your community care team, right? What resources are available to you in your community to support you? So whether that's accessing things like going to your local office on aging, seeing what supports and resources are available in your community, starting to tour assisted living, memory care, long-term care early. Tour it early, see what's available, get yourself well-versed that when the time comes, you are prepared to make decisions and you're not making quick decisions. We often say at AFTD, early discussions and early thought leads to better decisions. So as much as we don't want to think about these things, the more we can think about them and plan early, you're going to have better outcomes. Otherwise, you're going to be forced into situations where sometimes you have to make really quick decisions that you don't feel prepared to make. And for care partners and families, that is really frustrating because you don't feel like you made the best decision. So really familiarizing yourself with the supports in your community and the things that are available to you are only going to help you on your journey to be more prepared. And find your friends. Everybody has friends out there. We have a lot of friends and family who call the AFTD, who go to our website, who attend our webinars because they want to better educate themselves so they can be a better support. Your circle might get smaller. There might be some people who you say, you know what, this relationship is not helping me and my journey. But there might also be people who you find who you didn't realize who become lifelines for you, even if they're just the people you can call or tell your story to or are willing to listen, pick up groceries, go to the pharmacy, mow your lawn. Sometimes simple little tasks being taken off your plate mean the world of difference to a care partner or to a family. So it's a kind of a brief description of what we would recommend at AFTD.
And I love what you're saying about, share what you're going through, because you never know who has gone through something similar. Even if it might not be FTD, it could be watching a loved one go through some type of illness, or someone who may have been looking for an opportunity to give back, or someone who really wants that phone to ring. So you never know. And as hard as it is, when you put yourself out there, I've always found that you are going to find that tribe, those people who are willing to meet you where you are and be a support system for you. So thanks so much for that suggestion. Liz, you've lived this experience from your personal experience. What would you recommend about going about setting up a support team?
Yeah, definitely want to echo the education, sharing information. I think from my perspective as a care partner, it was speaking honestly and only for myself, the isolation kind of became a loop, right? Like I felt lonely and alone, so acted accordingly. And I think that sometimes is a self-protection, energy management, finding the best way forward with what you have. So I think if I could be so bold as to speak to other care partners is to echo that share, right? To reach out, to give yourself permission to take a break and to find your own support team as well as you're engaging a care team or an extended care team for someone diagnosed or living with FTD. I think that's a core element too, right? Once you can get your head above water a little bit, it is figuring out what will help you be present and, yourself, authentically yourself for your person. I think once I was able to kind of find my footing, I was so grateful to that support team that I had for myself as a care partner. And some of that was AFTD, right? Is being able to talk to folks. So I do think that if there's anyone in a care partner or in a person living with FTD's extended circle is offering that, hey, I will watch your person for the afternoon so that you can go to the dentist, right, or have an afternoon to yourself. So I think it's as Esther said, finding those true pals that will see you through the journey. I think is something that is a part of building that team.
That's a really important perspective. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know we have caregivers who are listening. And again, it might not be caregiving for someone with FTD, but there are people out there who, kind of feel like they have to hold everything on their shoulders. Absolutely. And we find this a lot also with spouses who think that they need to be the one all be all. And it's not possible, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of that other person. And then what are you left with? So such an important perspective to give. And I'm so grateful you brought that up. Now, you both mentioned that AFTD has a lot of different resources that individuals can go to, such as the website. We talked about support groups. I also understand there's a helpline. So is there anything more either of you would like to say about these resources that AFTD offers?
I would also make sure that everyone's aware that AFTD has a grant program. So it's called the Comstock Grant Program. It's for people who are diagnosed with a form of FTD, which is behavioral variant, any of the primary progressive aphasias, FTD with ALS, progressive supranuclear palsy, or corticobasal degeneration. But if you have any of those diagnoses, you are eligible every year to apply for a respite grant, which is a modest $500 grant, and a quality of life grant, which is really designed to improve the quality of life of the person diagnosed. People use these grants for all kinds of things. And because FTD is a little bit of a different type of diagnosis, we do allow for things with the respite grants, like having a family member come in. So you can use a respite grant to fly in maybe your mom's sister to come sit with her. so that you can have a break, or to hire a family member to come in. Maybe the niece can come in, but it's a financial hardship for her not to work, but she has a really good relationship with dad. And so we can, you can use the grant to kind of offset that cost, that type of thing. And the quality of life grant is really designed to improve the quality of life of the person diagnosed. So people tend to do things like they purchase iPads or communication tools to help them be able to better communicate, adaptive equipment for the home. People have used it to go to a football game with their grandson one more time, or, go do an activity that really is meaningful and impactful. Go to the beach for the day with their grandson because that was important. So, it's really finding those things that bring value and really improve the quality of life of the person diagnosed in the process. So I think that's one resource I would definitely encourage people to take advantage of. I think the helpline, too, is an under-discussed resource. AFTD's helpline is staffed by trained social workers, and all they do is FTD all the time. So we have 3 trained social workers who answer the phone. They answered over 4,000 cases last year alone, where they really just help families find supports and resources in their community. They listen, and they help educate them about what's happening and what they're seeing. So I think those are some of the bigger ones that I would focus on. We have tons of other resources to manage difficult behaviors. AFTD has a YouTube page, which has tons of educational videos that are available. We have closed Facebook groups that are really designed just to be community. So if nothing else, call the helpline. They will put you on the right path to find the resources and supports for you.
And Liz, as an individual who has been part of the AFTD community, and as well as your ambassador work, I think it'd be interesting to hear from you how you've seen all these different types of resources that help individuals as well as their care partners maintain that sense of quality of life and connection.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're talking about the AFTD services, there's something that I really appreciated is that, the support groups, the educational presentations, the ways in which communities across the country are engaged is volunteer led or informed. So becoming a volunteer a little over 2 years ago was helpful for me as someone navigating the FTD journey with my mom as a quality of life element, right? So my mom felt really strongly about being of service to others, making a difference in the community. So for me, being able to engage with and share resources with our community that she and I love so much was part of my self-care as a care partner. So becoming an ambassador in January of 2025, I think it helped me be a little bit more deeply rooted in AFTD's mission and see the different ways that the organization and volunteers and ambassadors were making a difference. And that role is really about relationship building, community education, advocacy, and essentially elevating the organization's profile and FTD, research, clinical trials, and services as a result. So I like to believe that ambassadors serve as that local connector, which is going to support that quality of life piece for folks living with or diagnosed with FTD and their care partners and their families and communities in general, right? So some of the examples of things that ambassadors are doing across the country is supporting volunteers in their state, right? Being that contact that either a volunteer or someone who maybe doesn't know about the helpline but finds an ambassador first reaches out to and says, I think this is happening in my family. What can we do? The ambassadors can serve as that, here's the helpline, here's some helpful webinars or some recordings. I'm here, check out the behavioral checklist, check out those pocket cards, I like to call them, which, perhaps we can share a link to or I can reference again, but really being another source of support and information for families, as well as advocating for policy and engaging stakeholders. So I know one ambassador is working around standards in assisted living and memory care communities to be more inclusive of folks living with FTD. So helping to formalize education, safety protocols, and training, so that the really incredible folks working in those communities can have the tools and the resources that they need. Organizing FTD Awareness Week proclamations in their state. So again, at the state level, elevating a conversation around FTD so that folks can learn more about it and find access to, an accurate diagnosis and services more swiftly, as well as speaking to local or national media to raise awareness. There's a phenomenal ambassador that it's been such a pleasure getting to know him, but, learning more about his journey with his family and some of the fundraising and awareness raising initiatives. He's so creative. So I think the ambassador role and any volunteer role within the organization is a real honor to help elevate conversations and I don't want to say humanize the experience, but I think sometimes when folks hear about dementia or hear about frontotemporal degeneration, it could be difficult to connect with the humans involved, but I think ambassadors and volunteers bring that element to the work of AFTD.
You all do a great job at it.
Oh, we're so grateful for the opportunity, Esther.
And I heard you say that being an ambassador is part of your self-care, and it also provides a community. Is there anything more you want to add about how being an ambassador and in your role has impacted you personally?
Yeah, I think it's, and when I do my AFTD introduction, I like to say that I'm, trying to be a living legacy for my mom. Is that I know if she were still here, she would want to be on the, Persons with FTD Council, right? And she would be right next to me, raising awareness and helping people feel less alone. So that, one less daughter, mother, sister, friend, felt lonely on their journey, the faster we can connect with one another. And my background is in community psychology, so I truly believe that being in community is healing. So the more we can do that, I think that's how it's impacted me personally, is being able to kind of live that value. I'll also say, as you were saying earlier, Cheryl, is like just being more compassionate and patient and comfortable with the uncomfortable. If someone is acting, quote unquote, unusually in public, or, if a care partner is, or somebody is just, tired and not their best self, I can step into patience and compassion, I think, a little bit easier and a little bit faster because of this journey and because of the support that AFTD and the ambassadors and my fellow volunteers have offered to me.
So before we conclude, I do want to open the floor and see if there's anything else that you would like to impart on our listeners. It could be reiterating something we already talked about, or perhaps something that didn't come up in the conversation, or just something you want to make sure you're leaving listeners with. So Esther, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think I would just want to say that, FTD is a diagnosis that no one should face alone. So I would want to leave you with the fact that there is a community out there. There are people out there who want to walk alongside you, to give you support and information, and to take the step and to put your hand out there. I'd also like to say that even though we say FTD typically occurs in those under the age of, between the ages of 45 and 60, FTD can occur in individuals in their 70s and 80s and at different ages. So try not to put FTD when it comes to the age in a box too much, but just be open to the fact that if you're seeing symptoms or if things are looking like it might be FTD and it's not fitting in that Alzheimer's box, that it's okay to be curious and to ask questions. And then lastly, the AFTD helpline is always here to help. So if you have any questions, if you just want to learn more, if you want to better understand the resources in your community, feel free to reach out. You can call the number, which is 866-507-7222, or you can email us at info@theaftd.org.
Liz, anything that you would like to say before we conclude?
Yeah, absolutely retweet everything that Esther just said, and just offer that you're never alone. It can feel lonely, and it can feel like a lonely place, and that's okay, right? In the darker, deeper parts of the AFTD journey, it's okay to be alone, right? And to feel that way, and to know that it is temporary, and that there's a community waiting to embrace you, to support you, to listen, and that you're not alone in it. And I think that can be a glimmer in those darker moments.
Esther, Liz, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing so much about your experience, your insights, your personal stories, and to help us all gain a better understanding of FTD, both the challenges and the support that's available. I'm sure we all hope that today's conversation leaves listeners feeling more informed and less alone if FTD touches their lives.
Thank you so much for hosting this space.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Esther Kane and Liz Zadnik for joining us today. You can learn more about AFTD, Esther, and Liz by visiting the AFTD.org, LinkedIn, Facebook, Threads, Instagram, YouTube, X, and TikTok. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.